So for this segment, we're going to talk about sustainable urban systems. That's sort of a generic term, but it brings in things like housing, transportation, walkable, pedestrian, bikeable cities, protected bikeways, all the things that let you enjoy a city, get around without having to rely on a combustion engine. Yeah, what do you think about that stuff?
I think there's been a lot of progress in the last few years from a policy side, but there's a lot of progress that needs to be made. Multimodal transportation is the big key term that's coming about recently with scooters and bikes, which is great. The regulation came afterward, which was very interesting to see that play out, and actually being on the side of it. The implementation side was very interesting, but there's a lot of progress that needs to be made. I mean, the boardwalks on the beaches, why are they 10 feet wide still? That's been the way it is for the last 50 years. Why is it not 25 feet and protected bike lanes? I mean, there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yeah. Well, so, my background was in working with businesses, and then I went and did urban planning, and you do that mental shift from thinking about individuals and businesses to how we design our cities, and that dictates 95% of what you can and can't do.
Absolutely.
As Americans, we're taught personal responsibility, which is a real thing. But if I walk outside and I can't get anywhere except with a car, I may want to take a bus. I may want to not be dependent on my vehicle. But if I can't go anywhere, functionally speaking, and I think that's where we're at. I've lived in several cities where we had really good transit. I lived in Boston. I lived in DC, spent some time in Europe. Great quality of life. In DC, I didn't use my car for so long, I got 4 parking tickets. It literally was covered in leaves. But you could survive and thrive without a car. And I think what we're seeing in San Diego and in the region as a whole now is that you've got folks who lived here, and they lived here back when there were hardly any people, and you had a car-dependent lifestyle. And there's parts of the geography where it's going to be hard to get good infrastructure there. But then you've got like downtown San Diego, where we've got infrastructure, and you could zone up, build 30-story buildings, and actually give tens of thousands of new people a place to live where they don't even need a car.
Yeah. Well, and on that point, it was very interesting because I worked almost 10 years ago. There was a lot of planning exercises within the city as a student on C Street, and no action has been taken on that since those planning exercises, right? But that's really an economic opportunity when you talk about their thought was realigning the whole trolley network. The big question is the trolley the right solution? From 50 years ago, maybe they picked the wrong path to go down, but from a regional and restoration opportunity, why realign a street? Why not just put trees and pedestrian and economic opportunities where those things can be had within the same network and create the businesses that can front to that infrastructure network?
Right. I think the term now people use are complete streets, right? You're not going to just go in and pave it to make it better for a car. Go and put in a protected bike lane. Make it easy for a pedestrian. I think what folks don't necessarily understand who haven't lived in a real urban environment is that when you make it easy for people to go into a place and out of a place, you're going to provide economic opportunity, right? I mean, if it's 5 p.m. and you're thinking, I'd love to go downtown, but you live, by UTC, except for the trolley, you're sitting in traffic for 45 minutes. So you're not going to take your family and go sit in traffic, but if there's the trolley and you can get downtown, well, maybe you'll go to a show, maybe you'll go, to a nice dinner.
Unfortunately, you're waiting at the bus stop for 10 minutes, then you have right? So like that network is still a little too hodgepodge where it's not that consistency and it's not that repetition that is dependable. So interesting thing, my thesis project in architecture was called Parkitecture, and it was taken from Louis Kahn, who is a famous architect that did the Salk Institute. And he proposed in Philadelphia to have large parking structures around the city. So that way the whole downtown was pedestrian only.
Right.
And I took that opportunity here in San Diego to create large parking structures around the city that can condense all the parking, and then you can create little parks within all of those smaller lots that you're not using cars anymore, and start with Gaslamp being pedestrian only, right? Those big level things and overlays could happen in the city if you have the right leadership, and we are a strong form of government from the mayor level. So hopefully, Kevin, if you're listening, or our new mayor, that's an opportunity where those overlays are really easy to happen when you do a public-private partnership.
Right. Well, and you spoke to the fact that just being able to get downtown doesn't mean folks are going to actually use it. It's all about those lateral and those connectors. And I think this is one of the things when I talk to folks door to door, when I'm talking to neighbors, what they say is, look, there's no system. There really isn't a system, and so if you put a bike lane down one lane, that's great, but functionally speaking, are you going to be able to survive on a bike,
right.
or taking public transit? I think what we now know is that if you look at our lifestyle, right, and this is the point that I want folks to really internalize, which is the things that are good for climate, right, the things that are going to reduce our emissions, these are quality of life things. If you don't have to sit in traffic, that's good for your quality of life, and it means there's no emissions happening, right? It means you get to go home, be with your family, go exercise. If you want to ride a bike home and get your workout, to and from work, that's awesome, right? That's the time you're not spending at the gym. We have such a great climate here, and the idea that people ride bikes here less than they do in cities like Portland, where it rains and it's cold, well, relatively cold, obviously. I mean, we have to realize that we are losing hundreds of millions of dollars in lost productivity with folks who can't get around.
Right. Well, and to that point, not giving away any business opportunities, but as our leader Elon Musk does, why not give away good ideas?
Yeah.
But public transit on the freeway system, like buses and trains along the 5 freeway. I mean, a very easy California solution could connect 3 different countries. Once you go through Washington and Oregon on the 5 freeway, and having buses and bikes and trains along a network, really that's a collaboration from the state and the network that's on the freeway. What is that? What is their organization called? What's that group?
Sandag?
Sandag.
Yeah.
Sandag's part of it, but Caltrans.
Caltrans,
right?
yeah.
Hey, Caltrans, why don't we build some pilot program that we can start to implement some of those solutions? Because that really ties the last mile.
Yep.
Right? If you can walk out your door, get on a bike to a bus, that bus takes you down to the freeway, you jump on either a bus or a train that takes you to another bus and train, then you're not trying to depend on these networks that are very hodgepodge.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I work in technology, I've been working with nonprofits, and one of the things that you realize for folks that spend day in, day out working with technology is that things move so quickly, right? And so the transportation planning that we're thinking about now, and we're thinking about buses and trolleys, I mean, we're 10 years, 15 years at the outset away from autonomous vehicles, right? Total game changer. You think about the ability to have roads that shift purpose, that shift lanes. I mean, some of the stuff already exists in a less sophisticated form, but the options that we have for transit are going to become so varied in the very near future. I think one of the things we have to be able to do with our policies is get out in front. I mean, you look at when I grew up in San Diego, right? I was born here in the mid 70s. You could drive anywhere, any time of day. I mean, there was literally no rush hour. And we had plans, but the plans weren't executed. And so we're really, we're 2 decades behind where we need to be. And if we're going to go where we want to go, we need to elect people and bring in advisors and really be futurists about this. And I think the closest thing we have to that in San Diego is Hassan Akrada, who has this 5 big moves plan for our regional transportation system. And it reminds me a little bit of, if you've been to Barcelona, you've got this amazing building called the Sagrada Familia. And Gaudi, when he built it, he knew it was going to be like a 300-year project. And it's sort of staggering when you think about how we do government in the States, where you're on like a 1-year budget cycle, maybe you're on a 3-year cycle. But with climate change and with the investments that we have to make, and I think we'll get into this, this is the time now where we start thinking about investments in 5-year, 10-year, 15-year cycles, because if we don't do that, we're going to spend way more money and we're always going to be on the losing side. And if we actually lean into what's coming, we can be on the winning side. And really, this is about how we as citizens spend our dollars.
Right. Yeah. And I think those tax incentives are critical when it comes to electrifying fleet and freight. A big part of what Hyperloop is coming out, that's a network that brings people from city to city very quickly. But if you combine that with electric freight, where you're moving products along that, or electrified 18-wheelers, you can have massive impact in a very short amount of time with just technology, and the technology is pretty much there.
Yeah. Well, and with respect to electric buses, so my understanding is there's a backlog now. I mean, China has, I think it's hundreds of thousands of electric buses right now. I think San Diego, we have our first one.
Yay.
Hey, we'll take it. But we have to lean into this. I mean, you look at asthma rates, you look at the billions we're spending because of poor air quality. There's folks, I know this, there's folks out there who are not concerned about climate change. And honestly, if you're not concerned about climate change, all the stuff that we're talking about is still good business because we're paying for it. We're paying for it in traffic. We're paying for it in bad air quality. But going back to the buses thing, it's half the cost to retrofit an existing bus to make it electric than it is to buy a new bus. So, we can save money putting people to work, retrofitting these buses. And, that's good business.
Well, and there's a fleet of them up in Hemet that I drive by when I go out to the desert. There's probably about 500, so MTS can have a field day with retrofitting. It's a big, they're running almost 24/7 with their bus fleets, and how many buses do we have in San Diego?
Yeah.
That off the top is just good financial sense. So now we can kind of discuss the housing aspect of that strategy, right? Because that kind of does transition into those discussions, right, on homeless housing.
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely.
Like, it's cheaper to give somebody a house than it is to leave them on the streets.
No question about it. Well, and honestly, if you think about transportation and you think about housing, and you have to think about those two things together. And that's one of the reasons why, I'm not a big fan of what's happening at the state level right now, where they're kind of just saying, well, let's just get rid of zoning and build density. It's like, well, you can't really do that effectively if you're not thinking about it holistically in an integrated way with transportation systems. We obviously need density, and downtown San Diego could absorb a huge amount of density where we have the infrastructure. So before we start sending, tens of thousands of people into pockets that are effectively peninsulas, with the idea that, like we said, you could have one lane, critical line of public transit, but if they can't get, a quarter mile over when they get to the destination, it's not going to work. So connecting land use and transit, these are critical things. The least amount of pollution in any trip to work is walking. We all know that, right? So downtown San Diego has so much potential. We're still seeing a lot of businesses choose not to be in downtown. And one of the things that I'd like to see is investments and incentives that drive more businesses to want to locate downtown, because this is where we have the capacity to really go vertical. And I think I just read an article that said there were 35,000 new jobs in San Diego last year. Well, if we're concentrating growth in the urban core and housing and density in the urban core, we can literally turn this into a thriving urban environment. But we have to get intentional about that.
Yeah. Well, and I think a big part of it is why aren't there streetcars, right? That seems like a kind of one-off solution, but getting people on a public network that also is coupled with a bus system, but light rail is something that is very feasible and very easy to do, that starts to connect that downtown core to that more dense region like our place in North Park, right? If you can get people up into Hillcrest easy and then over down into North Park and back around South Park and around, you have to start to expand that urban core to that next ring as well, because that is a high density pocket.
Yeah. Did you know that when Balboa Park was constructed, they actually had a streetcar that went around it?
Oh, yeah.
That's how they got to the fair. That's the thing. When folks say, no one's ever going to take public transit in San Diego. There are people who will never take public transit in San Diego. That's different than will we as a system, as a society, have younger people and folks who come to the area choose to come here because they can get around and enjoy this quality of life without sitting in traffic? I think the answer is definitely yes.
If you can connect MTS to the airport, right?
Well,
if you can go the last mile, which I know it's been approved now. I mentioned that to Kevin a little while ago, but why not do that last little mile, and why is it taking so long, right?
Of course. You look at what we spend on rail in the US. We, for some reason, and we've got to get to the bottom of this, but it's more expensive to do public transit in the US than any other country. It's cheaper in Europe. Maybe they've got more experience with it, but we've got to get serious about putting out this infrastructure quickly, because we can't wait until it's, what San Diego has, a 35, 45 minute rush hour where it's really bad. We're not going to wait till it's 2 hours till we do something. We've got to get started now.
Well, that goes back to the point about connecting cities, right? I worked on a competition for the high-speed rail that was LA to San Francisco. And the big question there is, why is it out in the middle of nowhere?
Yeah.
Why is it not on the 5 freeway? Like that kind of, I put forth a very different proposal, which is streetcars, buses, and different networks on the freeway, just because it didn't make sense to build an architectural hub in downtown LA that is disconnected from everywhere in between. So, yeah.
Well, and I got to tell you, look, I would love for there to be every kind of public transit system of every kind, But we do have to prioritize and phase the stuff out.
Yeah.
My preference, we should be investing in our urban environment, our regional urban systems, because, I mean, look, it's great to be able to hop on a high-speed train and go to LA or San Francisco, but if I can't get around my own neighborhood, if I can't get to and from work, and so I'd like to see state dollars invested in regional public transportation systems. Let's make it so that we can thrive and really reduce our day-to-day impacts. Yeah. And then we'll see what comes next. But I think that's one of the reasons why people they're a little suspicious of a lot of public investment, because they look at that and they go, why are we spending billions of dollars on a rail system that isn't going to impact my day-to-day? Yep. Those are my tax dollars.
Of course.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great kind of overview of transportation and sustainable networks. I think hopefully that was helpful and kind of just a discussion piece on what our thoughts are on those systems and how improvements can be made from a policy level and an implementation level.
Definitely.